All right, sorry, I haven't posted in a few days. I've been a little busy, but now as you can see, I've got the basic setup of excuse me, sir, basic setup of my new layer, I guess. But essentially, I was waiting to get this new camera because I wanted to get it set up to where I think it'd be easier for me to explain without having to just go straight into all these different images, as well as it would be easier. I feel like just excuse me, sir. Yeah, it's easier for to see how much time I get distracted because my dog always wants to sit in my chair. But in the recent chapter, Gray was able to create a new style to his magic by pretty much just imitating what he knew of Natsu's fire magic and creating ice flames. Now, the thing is, we have similar fire in the verse. We have the blue fire that Todomaru had that produces cold, but it's not really the same. From at least from what we were shown, and we didn't see it a ton. So it's not like we have a all around examples of it and we're able to see like, oh, his blue fire versus this other character's blue fire. It seems to be like it just has the same properties of fire, but it makes cold. Like it's not the exact same thing. I would assume it would just be more of the kind of like the cold attribute, but it still does like fire damage. Either way, Graze is different because Graze is more of a like extreme version, I guess I can say, just without having to go too much into it. But the way that it is we know for Maker Magic, it's all very different person to person because Maker Magic is a free type of magic. It's all based off of the imagination and understanding of the user. It's been compared to a lot with alchemy, and that's something that's been really consistent with the verse, and that's something that has always been structured into connections with it. A lot of the fan translations as well, and the wording would translate a lot of the words between them as alchemy and like transmute, and just anything that falls into the category that would be it. Also, I'll mess with my camera setup a little bit. I don't have a full idea of where I want it to be exactly. I was like, well, okay, cool. I got a camera that doesn't lose focus every 20 seconds because the other one I bought was like a $20 camera just to kind of get it all set up and test it. And then I've been a little preoccupied with other stuff and getting a couple things I'll eventually announce and talk about whenever I get around to have the time for it. But for now, Gray's whole thing is he as an ice make wizard, again, it's going to be different than say Leon's generally he's making animals and creatures. Gray for the most part makes objects. I mean, he makes mostly weapons and stuff like that, but it's not limited to that. Maker magic, as we know, it's completely subjective to the creativity and imagination of the user. When Gray was turned into a kid in his fight against Doriat, he wasn't able to directly fight him in terms of combat, but he was able to make slicker, just kind of like on the fly tricks. And he talked about how his brain being in such a younger creative state, it just makes it so he's able to do different things on the fly and is think a little bit nastier on his feet. Again, he's turned into Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone. He's throwing more like just tricks and little moves instead of these large weapon and onslaught type of attacks. But when you see stuff like that, as well as what how Ur described it, how it's a very free form of magic, it has to do and it shapes around the individuality of the user, as well as we've seen that Gray's ability of imitating and copying and learning other magics, especially ice magics, has been it's been consistent in the series. Especially look at just when he fought Invil and he copied Invil's ice into his and was able to adapt to it and then become immune with his Slayer abilities. You look at Gray's abilities as a whole. Gray is not Gray didn't get Devil Slaying and then just I'm only going to use Devil Slaying. He uses Devil Slaying more so how Natsu uses Fire Dragon King mode, where it's part of his moveset, but it isn't he's not going to just pop into it at every point in time. Gray uses it as an extension to his Ice Make in a lot of ways, because his Devil Slaying style is pretty much just an enhanced version of his Ice Make style. So when you look at all of the different areas that Gray had progress throughout 100 Years Quest, they had more to do with his whole foundational structure of how his abilities work. So say him learning how fire magic works while being turned into Natsu, So now he's able to understand the properties and difference of fire magic versus ice magic at a fundamental level, to where he can apply the attributes and properties of fire magic to his ice magic. And we see that as well as when he turned into Juvia and he was feeling and sensing the moisture and just the environment and the atmosphere. Now he's able to directly target and freeze the air. And another thing that I think is the most telling of what I mean by this is when he, because like when he went against Invul, you gotta think he's learning about what the ability does. He's a Slayer, so he can adapt to it and then be, gain an immunity to it. On top of that, Gray and Ice Maker is kind of like adding an extra layer of what goes into his adaptability, because it's not just, oh, I can intake and try and process this power into mine. Gray, as an Ice Make wizard, can also copy it, so he gains a extra just thing to the Slayer adaptability that regular Slayers, like people who are just into slaying magic, aren't gonna have. So when you look at Hien, when Gray was in the illusion from Raj and he saw Hien use that serious style, Gray copied that and then put that into his own moveset. And the reason that is the biggest, like, that is the best example for the extent that Gray's at, because like with, say, like the Ice Flames, that isn't as crazy because Gray turned into Natsu, he was forced to use his magic, forced to kind of adapt to that style a little bit. Whereas with Hien, he was looking at an illusion. This was something that wasn't actually there. So technically, Gray could have a dream and have a dream of like a new ice ability or a weird power. And if he remembered the dream and understood enough, he would be able to implement it in his abilities. Or like if Gray went up to Raj and was like, hey, literally put me in illusion with an ice person that does this, and Gray could watch, get put in the illusion and then experience it again, not really, but in his mind, some weird ability. Like, just, I know one of the ones that people always use an example is like freezing time, like the ice ability of time stop. Or if he say he saw, I'm trying to think, would be a really odd example to give like a new power. I think Laxus, even though he knows Laxus, I think it'd be like if you put him in a battle against like Illusion Laxus, because then he wouldn't actually be in any danger technically, because also it's like Raj's damage, it wouldn't even really get up to Gray at this point. But you look at that, it's like, okay, well, in theory, similar to Natsu, he would be able to maybe look into lightning and apply it to Ice Make, to where he could make like bolts of pure cold. He's got like a Lanza of ice and frost that he just throws, and it's not even like an ice spear. It would just be essentially like a big, again, like a javelin of cold that just hits and freezes everything around it. In theory, and it's not like it. If I made this idea like a couple chapters ago, and it's like, oh, what if Gray combined like the knowledge of turned into Natsu and using fire make magic and applied it to his ice? That is more so the idea, again, in theory, whereas now it's just straight up canon. So we know that Gray is able to do this when he gets down to it. He just has to understand enough about his opponent. And I would assume that there's like a degree of like limitation. Like, I don't think he'd be able to be like, oh, ice celestial spirit magic. He could probably do something like maybe gain make summons, but like I would assume it would be limited to things that add like a property. Like if he made like shadow ice from like interacting with Rogue, and it was like, oh yeah, it creates essentially like kind of like you imagine you're seeing some form of movie where they show the dark of side when the night comes to the moon. It's just that much colder because you're not even facing the sun. Plus you have like the freezing outer areas of space, something like that, where it's just like, yeah, he sends a shadow at you. You're like, oh, what is it? You notice that everything that gets within the shadow freezes. That is the extent Gray could do now, because again, it's not like, oh, ice Taurus, ice Scorpio. He's not doing. Technically, maybe like Scorpio could do like ice sand and do some cool thing with that. But it's not infinite, but it's like close to infinite, depending on Gray's level of again, of understanding and whatnot. So in the idea here, once he was turned into Natsu, he experienced fire magic. He understood the kind of structural differences of conjuring and utilizing and shaping the magic. So once he just thought of like that again, but applied ice to it, and you can see it when Gray creates the ice flames, because at first it's like he's just creating the shape into ice, and then it gets more refined, and it looks kind of like in a halfway point, and then after that it turns into seemingly just solid, dark, I would assume dark blue flames or something like that, and then he's able to use it. So it has the effect of ice, but it is in the form of fire. So I wonder about stuff like that, because then again, it's similar to the blue flame that Totemaru had, but just like way higher level. It's just like if you had a fire that could burn versus a fire that just completely annihilates something, or like ice, it's like, yeah, this applies to frost versus this just solid flash freezes, whatever it is. But yeah, so there's just a lot right now going on with Gray, and I think that it's like you have to look at a lot of the roots of everything and how his magic works to really understand it, because that's one of the reasons when he was using, he's like, I can do it because I'm an ice make wizard, not because I'm Gray Fullbuster Ferrita wizard, not because I'm the Silver Sun or anything. It was specifically talk about ice make, because with maker magic, that is where this idea that as long as he understands a type of magic or what he's going for, he is able to create an ice variant of that with almost no limit. Again, it's not like he's like, oh, ice fairy heart. No, he wouldn't be doing that. To where it's like, if you say, I'm trying to think of somebody like weird that Gray, maybe like if you did something with like Racer and you're like applied slowing and cold to where you made this frost like AoE that slows down targets or something like that. Maybe does something along those lines. Maybe he thinks of something. I always like the idea is that he's eventually going to get to the point where he turns himself into like the cold, and he gains kind of like with Juvia, where she has a water body, he gains like a solid cold body where he's essentially just cold air or like straight frost or something like that, and he's able to fully shape his body. Because at that point, the idea with like ice make, he would be able to manipulate his body into any shape or style that he wanted, and instead of being like, with like Vambrace or anything like that, instead of making an encasing of armor, he would just ice adjust his arm to be a large armored shield or whatnot, or a big smashing hammer, or just give himself a sword. He would, because at that point I would assume too, he'd be able to essentially heal himself, because if he could turn into ice and then back, he could probably just create ice in his body and then turn that back into like missing parts potentially. Again, that's all up to him. Like, again, with that, he could potentially become like some form of water or ice healer. There's so many different styles and weird variants now, because it's similar to how Urza can get any magic now and enchant it into her swords, because she wouldn't have to learn it in a complex manner. She just has to learn a basic amount to where she can create the magic and then use the enchant to put in her swords. Because the same thing with what we saw rather with her enchantments and learning from Wendy. She didn't learn enchanting in like a super complex and large scale. She learned it more so of just like, I just take this and directly apply it to this. It would be like if Gajia learned Command T or Giant Magic from Makarov in a way that just was, I become big, I smash harder, it makes metal, you give metal way more size and weight and mass, it's going to hit way harder. So there's just something that you could look at that and go, okay, I can see the area where it could go. It just depends on where we get these characters out. So with Gray, it's a little weird, because like again with Urza could just go around and talk to people in the guild and be like, let me enchant your magic into my sword that I can save for later. And it would just be something that she could keep back pocket. Whereas Gray could literally just talk to people, try and like see them use their magic, because he doesn't have to even learn the magic. He just has to understand it enough to where he can apply the same principles to his ice make, and then bam, he could just make new abilities and stuff on the spot. It's just limited to Gray's imagination and Gray's knowledge. So there's a lot right now I'm excited to see come out for him. I know a lot of people want to see a Devil Slayer advanced for him. I do too. I'd love to see him just kind of push his abilities in all aspects, as well as I really want to see him just kind of like delve into alchemy, because I still really am hoping that him and Viernes end up having their own plot line later that kind of continues, and Gray just learns what he can, similar to like Devil Slaying, to buff just his ice make and to just keep expanding ice make, because at this point he doesn't need to be fighting more ice people. I think with say like Lekka, and maybe we could bring in like maybe with Scoleon, because Scoleon had the whole thing where he made the boat out of ash, and we never really had an expansion on that. Gray even commented on it, of like maker magic that like completely detailed down to such levels. So it's like, and instead of Gray fighting more ice people, if Gray fought more Maker wizards, and we were able to bring in these other powerful Make wizards in the series, like we are, if you know, when you have Lekka seemingly Scullion, maybe you bring in like another character or two, because I think it'd be really cool just as a something I want to close out. You could easily have a character like that in the verse that's somewhere out in the world that's like relevant in power. That's just, you know, one person, they're disconnected from everything. It's like, oh well, there's one Make wizard that's like, it wouldn't even have to be directly as like powerful. You could have Gray stronger, but this person just knows and understands things at a higher, more refined, detailed level, to where it would be like, you know, if you say like you took all of Gray's like current, like all his different adventures and battles and stuff he's learned, and again his own talents and capabilities, but you look at it, it's like, okay, well, there's still something he could be missing that would only be able to be either learned through, you know, events in your life, or through like decades and decades of usage of an ability. Like, what if somebody gets to a point where it's like, oh yeah, I can make ice make, and after I make the ice make, it can just keep going. Like, you did something, say you did an attack and it just kept expanding, it just kind of like almost runs by itself at that point. And so every time you do an ice make, it's like it's just like, unless you somehow destroy the attack, every time he does an attack, it's just going to be essentially a continuous extra bonus ability that just keeps going, because he's like, I'm trying to think of like the best way. It's like dynamic ice make, but it's like if you were doing it as a summon. So it's like you do some form of ice make, and it's let me see. I think I bumped my mic or my camera unadjusted a little bit. I'm still trying to get used to this one, just because I just got it and I've barely used it. But yeah, like I said, I'll fix that after. Like I said, it's gonna come down to, I would say, the next couple chapters of just seeing like what is going to be the big step for him. It's going to be hard for him to beat Viernes in a straight fight. The only way I could see him really like defeating him is if, you know, doing the whole thing with getting the Lacrima out of his body, and then at that point he would get turned. You know, he'd lose a big chunk of his power and he'd be vulnerable and he wouldn't be able to keep fighting and would have to flee or something. But otherwise, I'm hoping that Gray just gets kidnapped by him and ends up going with Viernes, and Viernes teaches him alchemy or something. But anyway, other than that, comment below, tell me your thoughts about this. I want to talk more about just like Gray's weird abilities and where his character is going with that. I have plans. I'm going to talk about each of the characters where I think their peaks are right now and what they could really achieve as like the logical big boost and like stuff with their abilities. But we'll talk about that, or and hopefully like the next week or so. But anyway, other than that, talk to you guys later. Bye.